The Honourable Leader of the Opposition.
Face an unprecedented threat from President Trump's potential tariffs. And what is the state of things here in Canada? Our economy is weakened. Our borders are weakened. Our military is weakened. And most of all, our Prime Minister is weakened. Why can't we have a carbon tax election so Canadians can choose a leader with the brains and backbone to protect our economy and put Canada first?
The Right Honourable Prime Minister.
Speaker, while the Leader of the Opposition focuses on himself and on me, we're staying focused on Canadians. We're investing in the kinds of things that are going to help people. We stood up for dental care. We stood up to deliver a school foods program. We're moving forward with more spaces of $10 a day childcare, all things that the Conservative Party voted against. But most recently, Mr. Speaker, they've announced they're going to be voting against the GST break for Canadians over the next couple of months, something that's going to help people at a time where they need that little extra help. But he doesn't care about helping Canadians. He just wants them to suffer more, so maybe he has a chance.
The Honourable Leader of the Opposition.
Mr. Speaker, he's lost control of our borders. He's lost control of immigration. He's lost control of spending. And with that erratic performance, we now see that he's lost control of himself. No wonder foreign leaders believe they can walk all over him. They see him as a weak, incompetent leader who does not even have the support of his own party. Yes. Why won't he put the country first for a change, allow a carbon tax election so Canadians can have a Prime Minister who will protect this country?
The Right Honourable Prime Minister.
You can tell he stood up all night against the mirror trying to practice that line. The reality is, Mr. Speaker, we've got our sleeves rolled up. We are fighting for Canadians every single day. We will stand up for good Canadian jobs. We will make sure we continue to have great relations with the United States as we build a stronger future on both sides of the border. We're going to continue to deliver the kinds of things that matter for Canadians. Dental care, free insulin, school food programs, all programs that Conservatives voted against, and now they're going to vote against a GST break for Canadians right across the country for the next few months. That's not being there for Canadians, that's being there for himself.
The Honourable Leader of the Opposition.
Just to prove how weak and out of control he's become, he just engaged in a mass hallucination, listing off a bunch of programs that actually don't even exist outside of his own head. But if he's not prepared to stand up for the country when it comes to trade, then why don't we have a real election about taxes? He can run on his tiny 2-month tax trick, and I'll run on my common sense plan to axe the tax and axe the sales tax on new homes. How about a carbon tax election now?
The Right Honourable Prime Minister.
We saw it perfectly clearly just now, the fact that he is trying to gaslight Canadians. He just said that the dental care program, to pick one, doesn't even exist. Well, tell that to the 1 million plus Canadians who've gone to see the dentist, many for the first time in years, because of the Canada Dental Care benefit. This is what he's standing against. He's trying to convince Canadians that everything's broken while he forces his MPs to vote against a GST break that's going to help Canadians over the coming months. That's not leadership. That's pandering to the lowest common denominator.
The Honourable Member for Belleuil-Chambly. Mr. Speaker, the Prime Minister has everyone unanimously against him and his so-called Christmas present. Canadians don't want it, business owners don't want it, retirees don't want it, students don't want it, economists don't want it. Even those who are well off and kind-hearted, they don't want it. No one wants the Prime Minister's Christmas gift. When will the Prime Minister understand that one cannot buy votes? The Right Honourable Prime Minister. Mr. Speaker, Canadians are struggling. That's why we are offering a tax break to all Canadians for the next few months. A tax break at the restaurant, at the grocery store. We know that Canadians are struggling these days. We have one of the best financial situations of all G7 countries, and that means that we're able to help Canadians a little bit. The Bloc might not want that, but that's because the Bloc Québécois, Mr. Speaker, all they want is to pick fights and squabbles. They don't want the government to truly help Canadians and Quebecers, but despite them in their opposition, that's exactly what we're going to do.
L'honorable député.
The Honourable Member for Belleuil-Chambly. Mr. Speaker, Canadians who are struggling are those who will not receive a rebate check. You know who is struggling, Mr. Speaker? The Liberals themselves. The Conservatives don't seem to support the proposal. The NDP neither. The Bloc Québécois neither. No one in this House seems to support the rebate check. If the Prime Minister is so sure of himself, why doesn't he make it a matter of confidence and have a confidence vote? Order, please.
À l'ordre, s'il vous plaît.
Order, please.
Le très honorable Premier ministre.
The Right Honourable Prime Minister. It's clear, Mr. Speaker, that opposition parties want a political excuse to vote against something that Canadians do want. Canadians need a tax break. That's exactly what we are giving them. It will be up to opposition parties to decide whether they want to be there for their constituents, to be there for Canadians who are struggling, or if they prefer playing petty partisan politics and picking fights. The Bloc and the Conservatives want to say that Canada's broken, but we on this side are here for Canadians to support them and to help them when times are tough.
L'honorable député.
The Honourable Member for Rosemont-la-Petite-Patrie.
Monsieur le Président, trouvez l'erreur.
Mr. Speaker, tell me what's wrong with this picture. On the one hand, we have Danielle, who is retired for medical reasons. Her disability income is $45,000 a year. On the other hand, we have her spouse, who earns $125,000 a year. Who's going to receive a $250 check in the spring? Yes, that's right. According to the Liberals, her spouse should receive a check, but not Danielle herself. She's being punished because she's too sick to work. That makes no sense whatsoever. My question to the Prime Minister is simple. What does he have to say to Danielle and to all retirees?
J'aimerais juste signaler à tous les députés.
I would like to say to all members to please be very careful in their choice of words.
Bon côté, de notre,
They should pick words that are accepted. The Right Honourable Prime Minister.
Dans cette chambre depuis assez longtemps.
I've been in this House for long enough, Mr. Speaker, long enough to remember a time when the NDP stood up for Canada's workers. In fact, they were the party of workers in Canada. Now, workers who have been shouldering a heavy burden throughout the pandemic, throughout the inflation crisis, they have done so much, and we have supported them. We're also supporting seniors and young people. But with this measure, with this rebate, we want to acknowledge the hard work of workers who need our support. The NDP is against it. The party that truly stands for workers is not the NDP, it's the government.
Honourable Member for Cowichan and Malahat Langford.
Like most Canadians, seniors are doing what they can to get by, but things are tough. The Liberals have let people down, watching as seniors struggle to even buy their groceries. The Liberals' latest disappointment, cutting seniors out of their $250 rebate. Meanwhile, the Conservatives rub elbows with the same grocery CEOs who are jacking up costs. Will the Prime Minister listen and give seniors a much-needed break? I mean, come on, even his own MPs are asking for him to fix this.
Yeah, fix it!
The Right Honourable Prime Minister.
Mr. Speaker, I remember when the party of Tommy Douglas, of Ed Broadbent, of Jack Layton was actually a party that stood up for workers. But now that we have a government that is recognizing that workers carried us through this pandemic, the Canadian workers saw us through one of the worst global inflation crises the world has ever seen, and that we want to give them support because we know things are tough for workers, not to take away anything from the help we're giving seniors or youth. We want to be there for workers, and the NDP is suddenly against benefits for workers. It makes no sense, Mr. Speaker.
L'honorable chef de l'opposition.
The Honourable Leader of the Opposition.
No sense, Mr. Speaker. I couldn't agree more. Here we have the NDP claiming to have torn up their deal, their carbon tax coalition, with the Prime Minister. But then they taped it back together when he promised a 2-month tax trick. Then, after taking credit for it, the NDP says they didn't know what was in it. Right. And now they're opposed to it. Mr. Speaker, these two leaders can't even figure out how to give away $6 billion properly. Isn't it time for a carbon tax election so that we can elect a common sense government?
The Right Honourable Prime Minister.
Mr. Speaker, MPs are supposed to represent their constituents here in Ottawa, but the Conservative Party MPs are choosing to represent their leader back in their constituency. I know Canadians across the country, including in Conservative ridings, are looking forward to saying no taxes on meals in restaurants or on all groceries or on kids' clothes for the next few months. But the leader is making them vote against these measures to help Canadians. If Conservative MPs want to stand up for Canadians, they need to stand up against their leader.
The Honourable Leader of the Opposition.
Well, Mr. Speaker, I think Canadians are ready to stand up and speak for themselves. If the Prime Minister wants to lecture us about democracy, then why don't we have a referendum? A referendum election where the choice will be the following. A tiny 2-month tax trick with the NDP Liberals, or a permanent axing of the carbon tax and axing the sales tax on new homes. Why not let Canadians decide now?
The Right Honourable Prime Minister.
Speaker, for the Leader of the Opposition to end the price on pollution would mean to end the Canada carbon rebate that comes to people's homes 4 times a year and delivers more money to middle-class Canadians than the price on pollution actually costs, while at the same time decreasing emissions. And in regards to housing, his failed housing proposal was to cut billions of dollars from cities across this country that they're investing in building housing. That would drive up property taxes for homeowners. That would make it harder to build homes. He has a proposal that is electorally interesting for him, but won't do anything for Canadians.
The Honourable Leader of the Opposition.
Electorally interesting. That's his condescending way of saying Canadians actually like my plan. Because Canadians have figured out that after 9 years of this weak Prime Minister, spending $80 billion on housing, with the result being the doubling of housing costs, that spending billions more won't make any difference. We're going to slash that bureaucracy and use the savings to axe the sales tax on Canadian homes. Why won't he let Canadians decide?
The Right Honourable Prime Minister.
Mayors from Kelowna, Abbotsford, Ucluelet, all in Conservative ridings across the country are speaking up that the investments we're making in the housing accelerator is helping them cut red tape, increase densification, create more homes more quickly. And the plan the Conservative Party has put forward to remove those billions of dollars from municipalities, just as they're tackling the housing crisis, would harm Canadians. But the Leader of the Opposition doesn't care about harming Canadians. What he wants to do is gain power, and he'll do anything he can to do that. While we stay focused on Canadians, he's focused on himself.
The Honourable Leader of the Opposition.
Mr. Speaker, the Prime Minister has run a groundbreaking experiment. He's put billions of dollars in a sack and offered it to politicians, and the finding? They're willing to accept the money. Incredible. A groundbreaking sociological study. He wants to give more money to local politicians who block home building. We want to use the same money to cut taxes for the people who buy homes and build homes. Why won't we allow Canadians to decide whether they want the money to go to the politicians or to the people in a carbon tax election?
The Right Honourable Prime Minister.
Speaker, at least the Conservative leader is true to form in that he would rather pick fights with everyone than actually deliver for Canadians. We know, as we saw during the pandemic, as we've seen through the inflation challenges, working together with the provinces, working together with municipalities to get things built for Canadians is what they want. What does the Leader of the Opposition do? He insults people, but then he also votes against direct money in Canadians' pockets, whether it's with investments in childcare or dental care, whether it's investments in taking the tax off of groceries for the next few months. These are things that he's standing against out of political self-interest.
The Honourable Leader of the Opposition.
Just shows how out of control he's become. He can't stay on a subject. He brings up housing, so I agree. I just threw away my script and said, let's debate housing. So he now changes the subject back to his 2-month tax trick. Well, here's the trick, everyone. After the tax break runs out in February, they're going to hike the carbon tax on heat, housing, gas, and groceries, all as a part of a plan to quadruple the carbon tax to 61 cents a litre. So will he get himself under control, show some strength for a change, and call a carbon tax election?
The Right Honourable Prime Minister.
Speaker, every day I get up in this House, I talk about one thing and one thing only, Canadians, and how we're there to help Canadians, how we're there to grow a stronger economy for Canadians, with direct investments that will support them, with free insulin, with dental care, with more spaces in child care, all things that the Leader of the Opposition is voting against. Yes, we're investing in the most ambitious housing solution that this country has ever seen, things that he didn't do when he was Stephen Harper's failed housing minister. We're going to continue to stand up and fight for Canadians while the Leader of Opposition gets up, pulls off his little performances, and fights against me.
The Honourable Leader of the Opposition.
He said he was going to talk about one thing, and then he rambled on about 10 or 15 things, all things he hallucinates that one day he might do if only he were given another 9 years in office, Mr. Speaker. Instead of talking about his real record, which is that he doubled housing costs, he doubled food bank use, he doubled the debt, and now he wants to quadruple the carbon tax to 61 cents a litre. Mr. Speaker, we need a Prime Minister who's in control of himself, so why doesn't he call a carbon tax election so we can get one?
The Right Honourable Prime Minister.
Mr. Speaker, I'll say it again. The Canada carbon rebate puts more money in the pockets of 8 out of 10 Canadians. But the Leader opposite wants to talk about one thing. He talks about food banks. Let's talk about the school food program. This is a program that sends federal dollars directly into school boards, directly to support delivering good food programs for kids. No bureaucracy, just investments in school food programs. The Conservative Leader voted against it, and worse, he forced his own MPs to vote against it, to stand up against their constituents and side with him instead of in Canadians who need help.
The Honourable Leader of the Opposition. We need a plan. We need a plan to protect our economy from President Trump's threats. Americans and Canadian provincial premiers have raised issues of chaos at our borders and within our immigration system. There are 4.9 million visas and permits which will expire in the next 13 months, give or take. If people leave Canada to go to the States illegally, there will be consequences for our economy. What is the plan to guarantee that those who should leave Canada will indeed do so? The Right Honourable Prime Minister. Mr. Speaker, every year in our country, thousands of residence permits, tourist visas, and other visas expire and people return to their countries. We have mechanisms and processes in our immigration systems and at our borders to ensure that people leave when they are supposed to and to ensure that there are consequences when they do not do so. We will continue to keep those systems working. We have also made adjustments in immigration to ensure that immigration meets the challenges of today. We have taken action to strengthen our borders. We are here for Canadians. The Honourable Leader of the Opposition. But his minister said that it would be impossible to even track whether people do, in fact, leave Canada. The Immigration Minister's Department, the Department of Immigration, just published a statement saying that's according to sources, the number of people who should have left Canada already but are still here is between 20,000 and 500,000. But that there could be even more. There could be more than 500,000 people here who should have left. Mr. Speaker, where's the plan? The Right Honourable Prime Minister. Mr. Speaker, we just put forward an immigration plan to bring down immigration levels over the next few years. This will allow home building and the economy to catch up. To meet people's needs. For example, we had more immigrants to address labor shortages. Now, we will, of course, keep our borders strong and protect the integrity of our borders. This is what Canadians expect. This is something we deliver and will continue to deliver.
The honourable member for Kingston and the Islands.
Mr. Speaker, last week our government announced measures that will provide financial supports for Canadians over the holidays. These measures should be supported by all MPs. However, we know the Leader of the Opposition has muzzled his members. According to one Conservative MP, we recently learned that, quote, everybody is being watched. What we say, what we do, who we talk to, end quote. The Leader of the Conservative Party has gone so far as to stop his MPs from asking the government for supports. Can the Prime Minister explain why the Leader of the Opposition should unmuzzle his MPs and allow them to support Canadians instead of forcing them to repeat his embarrassingly bad slogans?
That question is not regarding the administration of government. I see that the Prime Minister is standing, but that question was not regarding the administration of government. Stop, please. Order, please. The Honourable Leader of the Opposition.
Well, Mr. Speaker, it looks like the member for Kingston is not getting into cabinet after all.
There you go.
Some people bring happiness wherever they go, others bring happiness whenever they go. Mr. Speaker, this is a 2-month tax trick that will print cash, add to inflation, and make Canadians worse off. And if the Prime Minister disagrees, why won't he stop being so weak? Why won't he have the courage to call a carbon tax election and allow Canadians to vote to axe the tax?
The Right Honourable Prime Minister.
Speaker, Canadians elect members of Parliament to be their voice in Ottawa, not Ottawa's voice or their leader's voice in their communities. But the Conservative leader shamefully puts his own interests ahead of Canadians. We announced a tax break for all Canadians, a $250 rebate to put more money in the pockets of working Canadians, and Conservative MPs know their constituents want this, need this, and support this, but the Conservative leader is muzzling them and forcing them to vote against direct support for Canadians. Shame on him.
The Honourable Leader of the Opposition.
The Prime Minister's radical liberalization of hard drugs has been lethal for Canadians, 47,000 of whom have died of overdoses since this Prime Minister took office, more than died in the Second World War fighting for Canada. Overdose deaths are up 200%, and now our American friends say they may hit us with tariffs because of the Prime Minister's liberal policies on fentanyl. How many lives and jobs is this Prime Minister willing to sacrifice for his radical liberal agenda?
The Right Honourable Prime Minister.
Speaker, we are using all the tools at our disposal to save lives and keep communities safe for everyone. Meanwhile, Conservatives are choosing to use struggling people as political props to spread fear and misinformation. From the very beginning, we have been there to work on an evidence-based, compassionate public policy, public health approach. We have been there and we will always be there to work with provinces and territories to meet this time of crisis. While the Conservative leader plays politics, we're going to be there to support Canadians grounded in science and evidence.
The Honourable Leader of the Opposition.
Well, the science and evidence are now proven. After 9 years of radical liberalization of drugs, overdose deaths are up by 200%. And the worst overdose numbers come from British Columbia, where the policies have been most radically and enthusiastically implemented. But the NDP Liberals claimed that they were backtracking on decriminalization because it became so unpopular. Just this week, NDP Liberals voted for a committee report that called for full legalization of hard drugs. Will the Prime Minister admit that is his real agenda?
The Right Honourable Prime Minister.
Mr. Speaker, having an evidence-based and a science-based approach, compassionate public policy approach grounded in health care to the opioid epidemic is what we need to do, not just to save lives, but to create safer communities. While the Leader of the Opposition plays politics and uses suffering people as props to propagate a brokenist view of this country, we're going to continue to roll up our sleeves, work hard with provinces and territories to respond to this tragedy, to make sure we're putting Canadians first in everything we do.
The
Honourable Leader of the Opposition.
The Prime Minister's radical drug agenda is not the only thing that is broken. Our economy is broken as well. We now have 2 million people forced to go to food banks every single month, a 38% increase in chronic homelessness, 1,400 homeless encampments, and just today, Equifax reported that consumer debt is $2.5 trillion. We have the worst household debt of all G7 countries. When will he call a carbon tax election so that we can fix everything he broke?
Right Honourable Prime Minister.
Mr. Speaker, the answers the Conservative leader is putting forward to the challenges of Canadians facing homelessness or the challenges of food banks is to cut the programs that are actually investing in direct supports for people. Whether it's money we're investing in municipalities and provinces to reduce encampments and to build more homes quicker, he wants to cut that. Whether it's the money we're moving forward directly to schools across the country so they can deliver more schools, more food, and take pressure off of grocery bills, he's voted against that, Mr. Speaker. His only agenda is cuts and austerity while we help Canadians.
The Honourable Member for Lac-Saint-Jean. We told them. The Journal de Montréal reveals a surge in asylum requests at the border. The Lacal border crossing received more than 80 applications between Saturday and Sunday, about 7 times the recent average. A vice president of the Customs Union has said that in terms of employees, they're not ready to take on many people. And it confirms 2 things. 1, we were right to predict a rise in migration caused by Donald Trump. 2, we were right to predict that the federal government isn't ready, as usual. When will this Prime Minister take action at the borders? The Right Honourable Prime Minister. Mr. Speaker, once again, this is just anything we're hearing from the Bloc. We renegotiated the Safe Third Country Agreement with which makes sure people who come to border crossings must do their asylum request at the first safe country where they find themselves. This means in the U.S., Mr. Speaker. And yes, we did solve this issue with the U.S. By renegotiating this agreement, and the Bloc is ignoring this. They're just looking for squabbles rather than reflecting real facts. We're always going to take care of our borders rigorously. The Honourable Member for Lac-Saint-Jean. It's mind-boggling. Everyone warned them. We knew the Liberals were no good with the border, so the Bloc warned them, even before the U.S. election, that if Donald Trump won, there would be a surge in migration to the border. Quebec warned them, immigration lawyers warned them, organization warned them. We warned them as well, Mr. Speaker. And then, just as asylum requests start to climb, the union tells us that it's short-staffed at the border. And once again, the Prime Minister has no plan. Is he doing it on purpose, Mr. Speaker? The Right Honourable Prime Minister. Mr. Speaker, my honourable colleague is so proud of his written question that he didn't even hear my answer to his first question. We renegotiated the Safe Third Country Agreement with the United States to ensure that people who come to our border crossings should have presented themselves to the U.S. to seek asylum rather than coming to Canada. We do have a solution to this issue, a solution that we implemented as a government, but the Bloc doesn't want to recognize the facts. They just want to scare Quebecers. The Honourable Leader of the Opposition. We have a Prime Minister who is weak and a weak economic position. Facing the threats from Donald Trump, Mr. Speaker, now we're learning that the PM doesn't even know the extent of the deficit. Spending's out of control, and it goes up day by day when the PM is trying to buy the support of the Bloc and the NDP to keep himself in power. So I ask him the question again very slowly. How much is the deficit of the Government of Canada? The Right Honourable Prime Minister. Mr. Speaker, we will present our economic statement shortly, and the opposition leader can react to that. But I know full well that he will already vote against it, like he voted against all the initiatives that we established to help Canadians. Like, for example, our tax break that is coming up in the coming months for Canadians. He doesn't think that Canadians need this. We have the best fiscal situation of all our G7 partners, and he refuses to help Canadians. Why? Because he'd rather people be in a difficult situation to vote for him, but we are going to be here to help Canadians. The Honourable Leader of the Opposition. He is a weak Prime Minister that has lost control. He lost the control of the borders, lost control on migration, lost control of public spending. So he says that he can't say how big the deficit is, even though he already had a budget for this year. That's strange. That's the first time I've heard that from a Prime Minister. So we'll ask an easier question. What was the deficit of the Government of Canada last year? The Right Honourable Prime Minister. Mr. Speaker, while the Conservative leader continues to block and vote against initiatives that will help Canadians, he is trying to find ways to attack me. But we will be tackling and helping support for Canadians. We will be creating a tax break in coming months that the Conservatives will vote against. We're going to deliver assistance for workers that the Conservatives will vote against, like they voted against dental care, like they voted against school food programs, like they voted against more daycare spots. They don't want Canadians to do better because he wants to convince everyone that everything's broken.
The Honourable Leader of the Opposition.
Mr. Speaker, to show how weak he is, he actually has to read a script just to talk about his tiny 2-month tax break. My question a moment ago, though, was about the deficit. He admits that deficits contribute to inflation. We now have reports from the parliamentary budget officer that he appointed showing that the deficit is far bigger than he advertised in his last budget. So once again, I'll ask slowly, what was Canada's federal deficit last year?
The Right Honourable Prime Minister.
Speaker, I'll take no lessons from someone who stays up late every night rehearsing his little performances in the mirror. The fact, Mr. Speaker, is we're continuing to step up for Canadians because we have the lowest deficit in the G7. We have the best debt-to-GDP ratio and are projected to have the strongest growth in the G7 ahead of the United States next year. These are things that we've done because we've been investing not just in Canadians and support for them, but also in drawing in global investment. Third largest foreign direct investment in the world last year, Mr. Speaker. People investing in Canada because they believe in Canadians. Why doesn't the Leader of the Opposition believe in Canadians?
The Honourable Leader of the Opposition.
I know the Prime Minister said that he'll leave the economy to bankers. Well, the bankers are sure rolling in cash, collecting interest on the national debt that he has already doubled, while Canadians line up at food banks. The question, though, was about the size of the deficit. You cannot run a $500 billion G7 government if you don't know anything about the finances of that government. So can the Prime Minister tell us, does he actually know the size of the deficit?
The Right Honourable Prime Minister.
Mr. Speaker, what we are focused on is delivering for Canadians, is being there to recognize that Canadians need support now as we build a stronger future for them. That's why we're drawing in global investment to a higher rate than just about any other country per capita in the G20. We are delivering things that make a real difference in Canadians' lives, like dental care, like a school food program, like more spaces in childcare at $10 a day, like a tax break for the next 2 months, like direct support for workers. All things, Mr. Speaker, that the Conservatives are voting against because they care more about themselves than they do about Canadians.
That's right.
The Honourable Leader of the Opposition.
Mr. Speaker, he doesn't know.
No, he doesn't. No.
I was tempted to accuse him of hiding it, but you know, as Napoleon Bonaparte said, never attribute to malice what can be explained by incompetence.
Yep.
Mr. Speaker, who's actually running this government?
The Right Honourable Prime Minister.
Speaker, while the Leader of the Opposition continues to focus on me, I'm going to stay focused on delivering for Canadians, delivering a tax break for the next few months that will help Canadians with the cost of everything, deliver on supports for workers, deliver on supports for seniors, deliver on supports for youth. These are all things that the Conservative Party votes against. Not because Conservative MPs don't care about these things, but because they've been throttled and muzzled by their leader so that they can't actually be their community's voice in Ottawa. They're there to be their leader's voice in their communities. Shame on them, Mr. Speaker.
Right.